You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And as I do on every show, I can't thank you all enough. Our listeners are growing each and every day, and it's because of you. Many of you are sharing individual podcasts with friends and family. Some of you are sharing the entire show of Boomers Today with friends and family. And many of you, of course, are listening, maybe your walks in the morning, your workouts, listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, all of them. We're on all the podcast stations out there. So again, thank you for all your support. And I know why our listeners are growing, because we have wonderful guests, and not going to disappoint you. We have a wonderful guest today who actually was a guest in the past. It's been too long, Sherri, but we have with us Sherri Snelling, who is a corporate gerontologist, authorpreneur, and founder, CEO of Caregiving Club. She has an expertise in caregiver wellness, well home design, and brain health, and Alzheimer's. She is the author of the new book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, following her first book, A Cast of Caregivers. Snelling has served on advisory committees for the White House, the CDC, CMS, and Georgetown University. She earned her master's at University of Southern California and has master's certifications from MIT, Sloan School of Management, and Harvard University. So Sherri, thanks for joining us again on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it.
Well, Frank, it's wonderful to be here. And as you said, it's been way too long. I think the last time we talked was when my first book came out, which I am always amazed was 10 years ago. It feels like just a couple of years ago.
No, please, really, don't tell me it was 10 years ago, that long? Oh my God.
I know.
Yeah, and then I know I came out with one shortly after you did. And
you did, which was a wonderful book.
You inspired me. You inspired me. So great. So, let's get into the new book. I'd love to hear more. It's called What is the Me Time? What is the Me Time Monday? Right? Is that right? Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah,
or Me Time Monday? Yeah.
Me Time. Yeah. No, you're right. It's interesting because in my first book, I had a chapter called Me Time Monday, and at that time it was more of a concept around caregiver self-care, which was really the focus of my work for the last, 18, almost 20 years now. And really what it was about is how do we find just tiny little moments or minutes in our lives that can give us that, that breathing space, give us that balance back in life, maybe spark, some feelings of joy, and do it all so that it's on an ongoing basis, which is the Monday science behind checking in with yourself every week. So it really kind of started as this idea that grew into a workshop that I've been doing mostly for employees. So I work with employers to bring the workshop or the webinars to employees, especially those who are, of course, in the midst of caring for an older loved one or, a spouse, grandparents, in-laws, parents. And then, when the pandemic hit and things went a little bit more quiet, I wasn't doing as many speaking engagements across the country, and I wasn't traveling a lot to do these workshops. I had a little bit of time, and I thought, maybe this is the time to finally put the concept and the things I've been learning from the caregivers from my workshops into a book. And that's what this book became, is the whole, genesis, if you will, of what Me Time Monday is about for caregiver self-care.
Great. So tell me, your other book, which has been a great success. Okay. Explain maybe more how that book, who that book was targeted for versus the Me Time Monday book.
Yeah. So the first book, which was called A Cast of Caregivers, was really almost three books in one, because the first part of the book, I had interviewed celebrities like Joan London, like Holly Robinson Peete. I talked to Alan Osmond and his son, David Osmond, both whom have multiple sclerosis. But it was, I captured some celebrity stories around caregiving. Then the middle part of the book was really the what to expect when you're caregiving, taking you through all the different things you might need to be planning for, thinking about when you become a caregiver for a loved one. And then again, the last part of the book was really focused on self-care. How do you find that balance in life? And that's really become my life's work in this space, is that sense of balance. And so this book now is written from the perspective, I went back, and we talk about lifelong learning, right? As older adults and boomers, lifelong
Right.
learning is part of our longevity, keeps us going. Well, I went back and got my master's degree in gerontology after the age of 50, and
Right.
really became just fascinated by neuroscience, by how our brains work, and what affects the brain, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, mental health, emotional health, all these issues. So the book is really capturing a lot of the science that I learned, a lot of the research that I studied, how our brains work and how we connect to nature. And one of the things I find really fascinating is, we have these modern brains where we have deep analytical thought and lots of decision making and rationality, but really we also have what we call the ancient brain. And that is the part of our brain that is really connected to 2 to 3 million years ago, out on the African savanna, when we were living in, fresh air, blue skies. We saw a mosaic of trees that offered protection from sun, but also from predators. We saw beautiful grasslands, green, maybe some yellows and other colors that told us there was a water source and a food source, and we would be safe and we would be comforted. And then our days were based on circadian rhythms of light and dark cycles. Well, what's interesting now in our modern lives is we still need that to feel comfort, to feel soothed, to have less stress. We need to capture those types of elements in our lives today. And part of this is, we spend 95% of our lives inside. We are really tied to technology, and that's a good thing. Technology brings a lot of things that really help us in our daily lives, but we also need to find the balance with being
Right.
inside and all the technology. And that's the nature part of soothing our brains and really fueling our brains through nature.
Yeah, that's a balance is important, because technology can be good, but also could be pretty challenging.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so you also, refer to in your book, joy economy. Talk to us more about that.
So that's a term that I actually saw from an advertising agency that
Huh?
was writing about post-pandemic. People are looking for celebrations. They're looking for ways to find more happiness, I think from all the sheltering in place and all the concerns and anxiety we had through the pandemic. And so I kind of took that term and ran with it. And I was thinking, we're really in the Roaring 20s 2.0. People are getting back to celebrating in person, and really looking for those ways to happiness. That's kind of the holy grail, I guess, today, is how do we find more happiness? And what's interesting to me is, we have a lot of things that we hear in the news all the time. We're immersed in, global conflict and, social and cultural conflicts. And we certainly know also that the economy is something we don't have a lot of control over. And that lack of control brings about that anxiety, that stress, even sometimes depression. So what I write about in the book is we are in charge of our own personal joy economy. So nobody gives us joy or happiness. We create it on our own. So we have total agency and control over how much joy and how much happiness we can bring into our lives. And sometimes, again, that is looking at balance. Yes, there's some bad things going on. How do we balance that with some of the silver linings or the good things in life? And again, my book gives a lot of solutions and techniques on how to look at that. The other piece too is the book is really about wellness, which is getting, there's wellness everything these days, right? There's wellness pillows and wellness resorts and wellness tuna fish, and
Right.
everything has wellness connected to it, where wellness almost has no meaning anymore. I take you back to the ancient practices of wellness from, the ancient Greeks and Egyptians and Indians. And again, it's all about this life balance. And what I think is really interesting is we often think of wellness being exercise, nutrition, maybe a little meditation thrown in. I have 7 elements of wellness, and it certainly is physical, emotional, social, but it's also intellectual. It's also environmental, the environments that we're in that help us to heal and feel soothed and calm. It's about financial, and it's also about spiritual. And having little moments in each of those 7 elements of life is what gives us that better balance.
That's great. Great information. So, you've been in the industry for quite some time. Maybe you could bring us up to date a little bit on your feeling on caregiving itself. What caregiving was like years ago, how it's changed. How does it look? What does that look like today?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I love how you framed it up, because there are some things that are very similar to when you and I talked 10 years ago, and even 20 years ago when I first started in this space of caregiving. And then there certainly are some differences. The things that are the same are, I think we still, for the most part, we don't self-identify as caregivers. We still think of ourselves as, a wife or husband, an adult daughter or son, a niece or nephew or a granddaughter or whomever it is that's providing loving care to someone in our family, or maybe even a friend. And so the word caregiver is a little elusive, because when you try to connect the actual caregivers with the services and products and things that are out there to help them, they're not seeking necessarily things that have that caregiver word in it. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think that's still probably for the most part true today, although I do feel that we are seeing more people start to talk about themselves as caregivers and not just think of a caregiver as being a professional healthcare worker or a direct care worker. What has changed, which I found really fascinating, is, as you and I were both talking about, we do a lot of work with employers. And from the workplace perspective, the term caregiver is now being used to define anyone caring for a loved one. It could be a parent of a child. It could be a parent of a special needs child. It could also be a spouse, and it could, again, be more of the senior care or elder care. And so there's kind of this life course spectrum, if you will, of caregiving. And so in my book, I call it Caregiving Redefined. And, the wonderful former First Lady Rosalind Carter, who was so gracious to grant me an interview for my first book, and actually gave me a testimonial for that first book. And we just lost her a couple of weeks ago, so it's still so poignant in my mind. But she was the one that said, you either have been a caregiver, are a caregiver, will be a caregiver, or someone will care for you. Well, I take that definition, I kind of expand it, and I say, you start life being cared for. You end life being cared for, and in between, you are caring for different people. It could be friendships, it could be relationships, partnerships, children, parents, grandparents, but caregiving is constant. It is in our lives, and just it kind of has different people and some differences throughout those different stages. But if we can start to wrap our minds around caregiving is a constant, it's not a crisis that you fall into, it's not something you don't plan for. It does need to be part of that life look, and life planning. And then what's the balance? The balance is make sure you're caring for yourself at the same time. How do we make sure that you've got time for yourself through all these caregiving responsibilities you're going to have through life?
Right. I mean, even long distance, the term we use, long distance caregiving. It's not that you're providing the care, whatever support you're providing for that loved one. I mean, you're a caregiver, correct?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways, long distance caregiving is a lot tougher and more
Oh,
challenging, because you
yeah,
aren't there
absolutely.
daily to see what's going on, right? And you have to
Yeah.
rely on a care circle and on some healthcare professionals to help you out. But you're still the one kind of in charge or managing things and overseeing things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. So, we're going to take a real short break, I promise you, and we'll be right back. And then just to recognize our sponsor. And we come back, I do want to talk to you. You certainly get an opportunity to tell people they could get your book and everything, but loneliness is a huge issue today, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges facing that. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, are you looking for a program at your company to assist employees with elder care needs for their loved ones? Well, EASE is the Employee Assistance Solutions for Elder Care offered by Senior Care Authority. In our multi-generational workforce, the need for comprehensive benefits packages of senior-related services is greater than ever. With this type of benefit package, you bring an important opportunity to recruit and retain talent and provide the support for your employees they need. It's time to offer an employee benefit that includes elder care services. With EASE, you'll have a dedicated team of elder care consultants nationwide to support your employees, which will help you tackle the growing need for elder care services. To learn more, go to www.seniorcareauthority.com/EASE, spelled EASE, or call 888-809-1231, extension 1. All right, we're back with Sherri Snelling, who's a corporate gerontologist, author of her new book, Me Time Monday. So, Sherri, maybe before we get into some further discussion, please share with our listeners a little bit more about what you're doing, website, book. It's promotion time. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, great. This is the shameless plug.
Right.
So I think the best way for people to find my work is on my website, which is caregivingclub.com. And the business that I created over now, I think it's been 11 years, is really focused in two areas. One is on consulting. I mentioned I work with a lot of employers, but I work also with small startup companies and larger companies. And so we do a lot of consulting, and that can include things like analysis of marketing plans and research and helping to create programs and materials and content. And the other side is the content that we produce, mostly educational. So whether it's workshops or webinars, I still do a lot of writing for PBS Next Avenue and USA Today and some other outlets. And then, of course, my book is my second book now, has just come out, as you mentioned. And that, Me Time Monday, can be found on the Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, all the great online booksellers, but also in bookstores and libraries as well.
Great. Wonderful. Good. So before we get into the loneliness issue, I know you mentioned before how environments can shape both our mental and emotional wellness. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe expound upon that, what you said earlier?
Yeah, one area that I'm doing more work in now, which I'm really fascinated by, is what I would call in my book the environmental wellness piece. And that is not necessarily about sustainability or eco-friendliness. It's more about how our environments help us heal. And so whether it's the home or whether it's the office environment or even our neighborhoods, what we're looking for is something called biophilic design. Now, biophilia means love of life, love of nature. And what that speaks to is what I mentioned earlier, the ancient brain. So for instance, within our homes, okay, we're looking for, do we have views onto nature? Do we have nature inside, for instance, like plant life? Can we see the more of the nature elements? So do we have, fireplace or candles? Do we have, fresh air or a breezeway? Can we look at, a fountain, or do we have maybe just a little bowl of fish or something? But all the things that tie us to nature actually soothe that brain and make us feel more comforted. The other thing is, decluttering, which is, I think, something I know I struggle with, is how I'm a clutter bug. But, when your environment is cluttered, you feel very anxious. You feel very stressful because you cannot see what might be around that pile or those boxes or whatever it is. And so going back to that African savanna and trying to bring that type of environment into your home or office is really important. And there's a lot of science out there. One of the prescriptions for plant life is 5 plants, and particularly things like English ivy, bamboo, acacia palm. They actually help oxygenate the air, so you're creating more air care in your home. Biophilic design was famously done in a study that were people in the hospital, and they took 2 groups, one that had a beautiful view from their hospital room onto greenery and trees, and the others that had no view. The people who had the beautiful view needed half the medication and were discharged twice as fast as the other group. So we know that these types of connections to nature will help us heal and help us feel more calm. And I'm really fascinated by that. What I've created now, and I work now with a lot of real estate agents and interior designers and even ADA construction workers who know about accessibility and things like grab bars, of course, and things we've always done in the home to make it safer. But now I'm wrapping around this whole well home design element that really takes a look at the color psychology. We know green is the most optimistic color for people who are older. And it's also because where it sits on the color spectrum, it's the color that we recognize the longest, the color green. So again, connecting us back to, I think, that nature element. So there's a lot of things around biophilic design, air care, color psychology, and other things that we can do within the home to help us feel better and help us feel more of that balance and spark some joy.
Right. Great. Again, great information. So, we both have been in the industry a while. And I know that the U.S. Surgeon General came out with a report saying we have a loneliness epidemic. You and I probably didn't have to see that report to know that we have a loneliness epidemic. We see it all the time with seniors, and it's a problem. It's certainly a challenge, and I know you're doing your part. We're doing our part to try to help with that. But what suggestions do you have on how we, how do we combat that? It's not a good situation today. It's not.
No, it's not. And the one thing we know, Frank, I know you're familiar with it as well, is that loneliness does really have an impact on our health. There
Right.
was a study that was done by Julia Holt-Lundstat a few years ago that showed that chronic loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of what it does to our cardiovascular health. We also know that if you are consistently lonely, it'll increase your Alzheimer's risk by 40%. So loneliness is a real issue for us when it comes to health. And what's interesting, I think, about the loneliness epidemic is we talk about social isolation and loneliness in the same way. Now, social isolation is where we may not be as socially active, maybe we're not driving anymore, maybe we have mobility issues, and so we get out less and interact less. But loneliness is different. Loneliness is where you could be in a partnership or marriage, you could be at the office, you could be with loved ones gathered for the holidays, and you still feel lonely. So it's really about the quality of your relationships. And one of the great interviews that I did for the book, and they have their own book out, by the way, as well, is I talked to Dr. Mark Schultz, who's one of the directors of the Harvard Adult Development Study, which is the longest study that's been done on how do we live longer and how do we live healthier and happier. And they've done it now for 85 years, the study's been going on. And there's one constant, consistent theme. And that is that if we have good quality relationships in our lives and have at least one confidant that we can turn to at 3 a.m. that we can call and we know they have our back, we will actually be happier and healthier. So this whole concept of loneliness is really important. And whether it's making connections with grandkids or younger generations if we're older, whether it's just ensuring that we're having those social outlets, it becomes really, really critical. And again, social wellness is one of my pieces of the 7, elements of wellness in your life. And we know that we're social animals. Humans are social animals. We only thrive and survive because we have human connections. And without that, we decline pretty rapidly. And part of it, again, goes back to the ancient brain. One of the things that really concerned me during the pandemic is we were in this bubble of sheltering in place and not interacting with people. And when you have that lack of oxytocin, and oxytocin is the hormone that gives us love, trust, and bonding. And it usually comes to me when we look into someone's eyes, when we touch their hand or pat their back or give them a hug. It's the physical warmth of being near someone that gives us that boost of oxytocin. And by the way, I call them the 4 hormones against the apocalypse, or, oxytocin being one of them, and they're the feel-good hormones. We need that. And that ties us to these social interactions, which are so critical for us to, feel happier and also feel healthier.
Yeah. There's also been a lot of studies done, which I kind of chuckle at because we almost know what the response of these studies are going to be. Interviewing people and asking them where they want to live the rest of their life. And, 90 some odd percent, high 90s want to live at home. Well, of course they do. Everybody does. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing to be doing, depending on someone's situation. If they're alone and they want to be at home and they're in front of the TV all day long and they're not socializing, that's not a good thing. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we decide we want to stay at home and maybe we've lost our spouse or partner, we either need to have the agency ourselves, or we need help maybe from a family caregiver to get involved in these social activities. And sometimes it's adult daycare, sometimes it's senior center activities, or just finding a tribe, finding a group that you want to interact with that, is interesting to you, that also maybe helps you with lifelong learning. There's a great online platform called Get Set Up, and people can go and they can learn things like, new cooking recipes or a new language or whatever it is, or technology. But at the same time, they're also socializing with peers. So, those are the things we want to plan in our life if we want to stay at home alone.
Yeah. Do you think the perception that people have on senior living, that maybe has passed, maybe the generation before, that where, if you're not going to live at home, you got to go into nursing, and of course we know there's some wonderful senior living environments, whether they be independent, assisted, etc. But do you think that's changing? Are you seeing it change where that people are understanding there's other good options aside from being at home, that you can be in a nice social environment?
I think certainly it's starting to change. And you mentioned there's so many different options out there. There's the Latitude Margaritaville, which is more of an active 55 community. And if you love Jimmy Buffett, that's the place you want to go and live, because all the parrot heads are there and you're going to enjoy that. There's also the Greenhouse Project, which is more built around smaller residential homes that only have maybe 6 or 8 residents. They each get their own room, but you still get assisted living or memory care. So there's so many different options. I think that as a general population, we still have a huge educational leap to help people understand what are these communities, what's best for you, all the options that you have. I think that there still isn't a widespread understanding of that, but I think we're getting there. And I think as an industry, senior living and home care could probably do a little bit better job connecting with consumers, because we all know we're going to be there someday. So part of this planning ahead is just the knowledge of what's out there. And so, I'd like to see a little bit more dialogue and conversation around it. But I do think we're getting there. And I think there's some wonderful things being done on both sides. There's wonderful things being brought into the home, and particularly through a lot of technology. And there's also great things being done in these senior living communities where you can go and, be part of a group.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we only have a minute or two left. So I'm just going to ask you just any words of wisdom you have for our listeners. Maybe they're dealing with a situation with a loved one that maybe has been diagnosed with some form of dementia. They're needing some sort of care, and it's kind of the beginning. Any words of wisdom for them? And then I'll let you again share with our listeners how they could learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, thank you for being a caregiver, because you're part of a vast 53 million volunteer army of long-term care workers who are overlooked and underpaid for certain. So thank you for that. But, the first piece is obviously learning as much as you need to properly care for your loved one. And there's a lot of avenues to that, whether it's the disease organization of what your loved one was diagnosed with, or whether it's just finding out more maybe through your employer, which is offering a lot more information and connections now to resources. But then we need to take a step back and a breath and say, how do I keep that balance in life? Now, we know that our lives are thrown out of balance when we become caregivers because we lose a lot of that time that we spent maybe on ourselves. But we've got to get that balance back. The Hopi Indian Native American tribe has a great word called Kawanakwatsi. And what that means is life out of balance. And they really talk about it in terms of all the technology and the urban areas and cities versus the beautiful nature. And that's part of what I really resonated with. But we have to find that me time. And I know it's tough. I know it's impossible when you become a caregiver. However, think of it in small things. 1 or 2 minutes a day spent looking onto a beautiful nature scene, picking up a book that you love that you haven't read and just reading 1 or 2 pages. Give yourself some mastery and control back over your life by doing small things. And, things like putting music on, buying yellow flowers and putting them in a vase in your home or your loved one's home. These sound like small, silly things, but it's amazing how your brain connects to the joy. We know yellow is a color of happiness. So there's things we can do that bring us that sense and spark of joy that does help fuel us and energize us and give us the stamina to keep going as caregivers. And I forgot to mention, I've defined caregivers now as generation caregiver, Gen C. Instead of Gen X or Gen Z, you're now Gen C if you're a caregiver.
Great.
So, but I hope that everybody can take that message of small little things. Check in with yourself every Monday and make sure that you are keeping yourself on the list of priorities and balance when you're caring for your loved one, and reach out and get that help for that balance, that respite care from friends, family, or even services that you can bring in that help care for your loved one while you get a few moments to yourself.
Great. And go ahead again, tell people again how they could learn more about what you're doing and your new book coming out.
Absolutely. So you can find all of the information about my workshops, my webinars, and other things at caregivingclub.com. And then Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, which I think we can all resonate with. You can find that on all of the online booksellers and in bookshops and libraries. And there's also connections on the website that will take you right to those pages.
Great. Sherri, thank you so much. We can't wait another 10 years. Got to have you back sooner than that. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Frank. Great talking to you.
Nice talking to you. Please be safe out there. We'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.